Welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem with UF IFAS Extension in Alachua County. Today we have Leah Deal with us. She is the Director of Therapeutic Horticulture at Wilmot Botanical Gardens with University of Florida. And she's a lecturer. And I'll let you give more introduction about yourself. But this is part of our monthly Master Gardener Lecture Series program. And throughout this evening's presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A box. We'll be able to monitor those and we can help answer those questions there. Avoid putting things in the chat box because we lose track of those very easily. So put your questions in the Q&A. Some of them will relay to Leah during her presentation, but we always have time at the end of the presentation for you to be able to answer or ask some additional questions. So I know that we've been really looking forward to do this presentation. I know, Leah, like last winter we tried planning something and that didn't work out because, you know, coronavirus. So I'm glad that we're able to work with you and bring this presentation online for everybody. So Leah, thank you very much for joining us, and you can take over from here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. I've also been looking forward to doing this. And I think it's also kind of neat because for those of you that have been following Taylor's writings, he's been writing a lot about the history of gardens and their development over time. And I think this is a little piece of that. I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about healing gardens and a framework that I've put together for being able to distinguish one type of healing garden from another. So that's really what I'm going to be talking to you about today. And I do want to let you know that many of you who know me know that I run the therapeutic horticulture program at Wilmot Botanical Gardens, as Taylor has told you. I also am a lecturer in the environmental horticulture department here at UF. And we have a certificate program in horticultural therapy at UF, which is really exciting because there are very few of them in the United States. And we are able to say that ours is the only fully online undergraduate certificate program in the United States. So if you have any interest in taking horticultural therapy as an academic pursuit, let me know and get in touch with me. You do not have to be a current UF student to participate in this certificate, which is really another exciting part of it. And so I'd be very happy to tell you more about that information. You can also just go online to the UF website. You can email me, you can just Google horticultural therapy at UF and read a little bit more about that program. I'm not going to be talking a whole lot about therapeutic horticulture and horticultural therapy today. I'll just tag a little bit on at the end in terms of how it relates to healing gardens. But that is something I wanted to let you know because I know a lot of you do have some interest in that. So anyway, let's just get going. As I said, I'm going to be talking about healing gardens today. And one of the things that we've seen about healing gardens is they've become so popular and lots of people have been talking about them. They've become more prevalent, which is really wonderful. So too have the terms used to describe all of these different kinds of healing gardens, and it really becomes difficult to distinguish one from another. The term healing garden is often used to describe any kind of garden in a healthcare setting or maybe a senior retirement community, when in fact there really are some really important differences between different healing garden types that can really impact not just the design of those spaces, but the programming in them and also the use of those particular spaces. So gardens really need to be, let me go back there for a second. Gardens really need to be designed to meet the specific needs of those particular users. And the people that are using those gardens, those outdoor spaces, including, you know, wherever they are, whether they're community members, they're residents, they're patients, staff, family members, whatever that might be. So by understanding the user needs, by understanding the patterns of use of that particular facility, especially things like comfort and safety and all those kinds of things, we can then build better programs there as well and think a little bit more about the programmatic aspects. Gardens that thrive and that are successful are usually the result of good design, but they are also very much the result of purposeful and good programming. And that's one of the things I want to get across today. No matter what type of healing garden you're thinking about, or you're working in, or you're dreaming about, the programming aspect of it is really important. And that's what master gardeners are so good at, is thinking about how we can take this message of nature and plants and all that kind of good stuff and put it into a way that we can deliver that to other people. So to that end, this session is going to deliver to you, present to you a framework that I put together that describes the purpose, the design, the focus, and the potential use for these different kinds of healing gardens. I'm going to include some existing examples of different kinds of gardens so you can kind of see what they look like. And I then hope that you can kind of take this information and apply some of these understandings of different kinds of healing gardens and use those as you're thinking about working with different kinds of people and different kinds of gardens and creating different kinds of programs. So one of the first things I did when I was thinking about this concept and realizing that, you know, it would be helpful if we could kind of think about how to define these different kinds of healing gardens, is to, of course, Google types of healing gardens, or types of gardens, actually, is what I did. And so what I got was a whole bunch of things. You know, of course, Wikipedia showed up, and I looked at that. And at that time, about 65 different types of gardens showed up. Surprisingly, at that time, there was not a single garden type listed that I felt fell into that realm of healing gardens, despite the fact that there were some very interesting ones, like a pinetum, which of course is a garden that specializes in pines. There was a potager, which is a type of kitchen garden that tends to be right outside the back door. In this case, it looks a little bit like the front door. There was a firescape garden, which, being from Chicago, I thought, what a great idea. It's a garden on the outside of a building on the, you know, the firescape, which you always have to have on the outside of big buildings for safety. But in fact, it was a firescape, fire-wise garden for reducing unwanted fires. So, you know, that was an important thing. And of course, there was even a beer garden on this list of 65 gardens. I do not recall whether there was a gnome garden, but there may have been, but no healing garden. There wasn't even any kind of a meditation garden that was listed in this list of 65. Probably the closest thing in this list was the Paradise Garden. And actually its description, again, through Wikipedia, was really more about its history as a Persian walled garden than any kind of a healing garden, really. There was also a Zen garden listed, and that certainly can have some healing qualities. The focus tends to be on contemplation and enlightenment and that sort of thing. There also was an entry for a sensory garden, which I was thinking might be something like this, a wisteria garden, lots and lots of sensory stimulation. But in the description of the sensory garden, it was much more describing what I would think of as an enabling garden, which we'll actually talk about in a minute. So it was a little bit mixed up, much less information on actual healing experiences than I thought there was going to be. And, you know, we all have some idea of what we think about as healing gardens and healing types of gardens. And most of these ideas are probably on the right track. But if you were asked, excuse me, to describe the distinctions between these kinds of garden types, could you do it? Hopefully, after this presentation, I'm hoping you can. So if we can talk clearly and consistently about these different kinds of gardens, then we can convey those potential distinctions to our constituents, to the families that we're working with, to the school children, the teachers, those different kinds of things, to our own family members, and of course to funders or people that might be thinking about funding or building gardens. We can also compare and evaluate gardens more effectively as well, and that can actually help us get more gardens designed and built. So the second thing after I tried to find that list was to go to the dictionary and look up adjectives that describe these garden types. Things like, you know, healing, contemplation, enabling, words like that. And I know that it can be kind of tedious to be relying on the dictionary to look up some of those kinds of words, but because we really are using and to some extent relying on some of these vocabularic nuances, I think it is pretty important that we really understand what these different words mean and what the background of those words are. So we're going to be looking at some of those definitions as we explore these garden types. And these were some of the words that I looked up. Okay, so the way I see it is that the relationship of these various garden types is sort of like a family tree. At the moment, this is blank, but over the course of this presentation, we're going to be filling in this family tree with the broadest garden types at the top, and then the more specific types falling beneath that, and the definition and getting more and more narrow as we get to the bottom. And one thing that I want to make very clear, and that I'm going to be repeating throughout this discussion, is that just because the definition of a garden type is narrow or specific, that does not by any means mean that the garden has few options in terms of its design. A garden with very specific qualities can be designed in a million different ways. There's all different kinds of ways to express that specificity, I guess you could say. And that is the hallmark of good design. The other thing I want to point out is that because gardens are living, breathing entities, and no two gardens are the same, it's impossible to put an absolute on any one of them in terms of categorizing them into a very specific framework. There's bound to be some overlap, and you're going to see some overlap in some of the gardens that I'm going to talk about. But we can categorize the main focus of the garden or the main goal of the garden. And that's what I'm trying to do with this framework. So what's at that top level? Well, at first I thought it makes sense for the healing garden to be at that top level, be that kind of overarching garden type with all of the more specific gardens types and types of gardens falling below it or underneath it. So when you look up the word healing, this is what you see. It's a transitive verb to make sound or whole, to restore to health, to cause an undesirable condition, to be overcome or to mend. So in reading this definition, the term healing can be used very broadly, as well as in a medical context. And I especially like that third point because it reminds us that healing isn't always about fixing something, but it's often about overcoming something, transcending difficult circumstances. And that's really what we are aiming at in our healing garden experiences. We're not necessarily able to fix somebody's problem, but we're helping them with coping strategies or with new ways to look at things. And that's really a lot of what horticultural therapy and therapeutic horticulture is based on. In some cases, we are able to help them fix things by helping them with rehabilitative exercises to get that knee working again. But in many cases, it's helping them to develop new coping strategies for some issues that they're dealing with. So that sense of overcoming is really an important thing. And we can usually help people to learn to overcome or to cope with situations through contact with nature and plants. Now, the problem with the term healing garden being used as that umbrella term, and perhaps more importantly, the types of experiences being taken place in these spaces was actually the term garden. A garden is a term that means the space has been manipulated in some kind of a way. A garden implies that something has been created. A planting bed has been shaped, or plants, whether they're flowers, they're herbs, they're vegetables, they have been chosen and they've been planted there. What about all of those natural landscapes that are out there that have not been created by humans? Can't they be healing? Well, of course they can. They are often the most healing in some ways for many people. In her blog on the Therapeutic Landscapes Network website, Naomi Sachs used the term landscapes for health. She defined it as any landscape, designed or wild, that promotes and facilitates human health and well-being. So in other words, any natural or manipulated landscape that makes you feel good and more technically contributes to positive outcomes. Her examples include stretches of beach, a community garden, a clearing in the woods, a lush green indoor atrium in the wintertime, and lots of other things. So this term, landscapes for health, makes perfect sense at the top of our hierarchy tree, this family tree, and then our healing garden types, our healing gardens can kind of fall below that. So we're going to talk today about the healing gardens track and all of the things that fall under that. But I do want to point out that there's another track under the Landscapes for Health umbrella, specifically those natural landscapes that also promote health and healing. So I just want you to know those are there. That's a lecture for another day, but that's part of this overall hierarchy. Okay, so looking back at healing gardens, the next thing under this Landscapes for Health in line is the healing gardens. And the American Horticultural Therapy Association has the following definition for a healing garden. Healing gardens are plant-dominated environments, including green plants, flowers, water, and other aspects of nature. They're generally associated with hospitals and other healthcare settings, designated as healing gardens by the facility, accessible to all, and designed to have beneficial effects on most users. A healing garden is designed as a retreat and a place of respite for clients, visitors, and staff, and to be used at their desire. Healing gardens then AHTA goes on to describe how healing gardens can then be further divided into specific types of gardens, including therapeutic gardens, horticultural therapy gardens, and restorative gardens. They talk about the fact that these gardens tend to have some overlap, and that you need to recognize their definitions as guidelines. So some key points in their definitions, these types of gardens, these healing gardens include green plants, flowers, water, other aspects of nature. They're generally associated with healthcare settings. They don't always have to be, and they're accessible to all. And then that less concrete point, they have beneficial effects on most users. And that's really the key. The garden must facilitate those beneficial effects. And that's the kind of the harder thing to grasp. We all can understand raised beds help make things more accessible. They bring the plants up. You know, we understand that paved pathways make it easier for people to get places, and shade is important and sun is important. But how do we actually facilitate some of those beneficial effects? And those are some of the things I'm going to try to talk about. So Roger Ulrich, if you haven't heard about him, he's a very important figure in the field of environmental psychology. He proposed a theory of supported environments, and he says, and this is a quote, "The capability of gardens to have healing influences stems in large part from their effectiveness in facilitating stress, coping, and restoration." So he proposes that gardens and healthcare facilities are important stress mitigating resources for patients and staff, to the extent that they foster a sense of control, both perceived and actual control, and that they provide access to privacy and temporary escape. He talks about the fact that when you go into a hospital, you feel like you have lost all sense of control. You know, people are telling you what to do, they're telling you what to eat, they're telling you what to wear. And that the fact that you have lost all of that is difficult, but when you get to go out in the garden, you regain some of that control, and how important that can be. Social support is also a really important thing, and social support among patients, among visitors and staff, and being in the garden is a place where you can take advantage of a lot of that social support. Also, the gardens can foster physical movement and exercise, and obviously in a much more beautiful and natural place than walking up and down the hallways of the hospital. And in a garden, there's opportunities for mild exertion and physical rehabilitation. And then of course that access to nature and to other positive distractions can really help to work toward that stress mitigation as well. So things like plants and flowers and water, nature sounds, wildlife. His theory then further contends that a requisite condition for these 4 stress coping resources or mechanisms to be effective is that a garden really needs to convey a sense of security. You need to feel safe when you're there. People that undergo a medical procedure or in the hospital, they often feel very psychologically vulnerable. You know, they don't know what's going on. They don't necessarily know if they're going to be healthy again or whether they're even going to get out of the hospital. And so that psychological vulnerability is very stressful. And so that importance of sense of safety and security is not just about physical safety, but also about that psychological safety. So that creating a garden and having access to that garden can really help alleviate some of that. So those areas that I've just described here help to provide that stress restoration and a sort of buffering which leads to enhanced coping. And that really helps your situation in a healthcare environment. And then that actually does lead to improved health outcomes. And there's been some research on that. Claire Cooper Marcus, who's been a person who has done a lot of research in the evaluation of gardens and healthcare environments, and also Naomi Sachs, who I just mentioned, who came up with that term landscapes for health. These are a couple of books that they've written on therapeutic landscapes and healing gardens and that sort of thing. And Claire Cooper Marcus really characterizes the key qualities of successful healing gardens. She says that the more that we're engaged with the environment through all of our senses, the lower our rates of anxiety and the less we're actually aware of our pain. So a healing garden, especially one that is associated with a healthcare environment, really needs to provide a multi-sensory experience with very colorful flowers, with varying shades of green and textures of plants, with sights and sounds of water, elements that attract butterflies and birds, other kinds of wildlife, fragrances, natural fragrances, of course, and then things like ornamental grasses that move with just the very slight breeze. And the outdoor space needs to actually be a garden, not a courtyard with a bunch of plants plopped down in containers, but really have that sense of being nature. They say that 7:3 green to hardscape ratio is the thing that you're going for at lush green setting. She also talks about the importance of exercise as well, many beneficial effects to that, both on physical as well as mental health. And I think we all know that. So depending on the size of the garden, being able to have some longer and shorter pathways that maybe loop through there. There's also evidence, and I mentioned this with Roger Ulrich, that the more social support a patient receives from family and friends while in that healthcare environment, the better and faster they're able to heal. So a garden is one really awesome place where a patient and a visitor can converse in a private or a semi-private and certainly a very attractive setting. So it's very essential in a healing garden, especially in a hospital garden, that sensitive planting design and site furnishings provide semi-private, private niches for one or two people or for a family group to be alone. And these are all really important things that have been researched and figured out about healing gardens, and that are very important to make the most of them. When we enter a hospital or an assisted living facility as an inpatient or a resident, as I said, in many cases, the institution decides what we wear, when the doctor visits us, who we share a room with, and perhaps maybe even what we eat. So as I said, we lose control over the situation, much more so than we ever did at home. So the more control we lose, then the more we're going to be stressed. So to enhance that sense of control in a garden, to try to balance that a little bit, we want to give as many choices as we can in a garden. We want to give choices of pathways. We want to give choices of places people can sit and walk and things to look at. So all of those kinds of things, views, things like that are all really important. So choice, especially again, when it's associated with a healthcare situation, is very important. So lots more design concepts involved in this, but I just wanted to kind of give you an idea so that you understand why some of these things can be so important as we're talking about the different kinds of healing gardens. So in short, a healing garden is an environment that provides stress-reducing healing experiences at many levels and in many forms. And the term healing itself is a fairly vague term. It could refer to physical rehabilitation, cognitive improvement, emotional restoration, among many other things. And that's really where these healing garden subcategories come in, or patient-specific gardens. For example, a garden designed for a children's hospital should be significantly different than a garden designed for adults with Alzheimer's, and so on. Now, AHTA's definition does state that the garden should be designated as a healing garden by the facility with which it's associated. But another important aspect of a healing garden that really isn't addressed in this definition is that the garden should also be specifically designed to provide positive health outcomes and then be successful in actually doing that. We cannot call a garden a healing garden if it's not actually facilitating healing experiences. This really does go a step beyond AHTA's requirement of beneficial effects. And these are things that would help distinguish a basic garden, which could be a very beautiful garden, from an actual healing garden. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Okay, moving on. So under the healing garden category are two major garden types, one of which is the restorative garden. Now, based on theory developed and research conducted in the environmental psychology field, there are some very specific requirements that a landscape must have to be restorative and to facilitate restoration. And while the implementation of these requirements can vary widely from garden to garden, the goals are the same, and that's to provide a restorative experience to the visitor or to the user. So back to our dictionary, restoration is defined as an act of restoring or the condition of being restored, bringing back to a former position or condition, a restoring to an unimpaired or improved condition. So which impaired condition is being restored could vary tremendously. Stress, agitation, an inability to focus, some kind of physical injury, among many other things. Environmental psychologists working in this area have identified 4 components of a landscape or a garden that are essential in fulfilling the goal of being restorative. And these are being away, extent, fascination, and compatibility. Being away refers to escaping from your stressors, temporarily anyway. Extent is about the place you've escaped to, that it provides a sense of truly being away, in that it's rich enough and it's coherent enough to really feel like an actual place that takes you away. Fascination refers to the gentle stimuli in the landscape or the garden, things that are very interesting and which capture your attention, but which aren't demanding of your attention. And then compatibility is about whether the garden supports the activities that will be restorative for you or for the users of that garden. Are there butterflies to watch? Are there pleasing sounds and engaging views? Is there a place to walk or to sit if you need to do that, so that you can enjoy comfortably all that that space has to offer? And can you engage in those activities easily and without struggle? So those would all be aspects of a compatible environment. Now, you may think that any of these things make sense for any type of healing garden, and on some level, they certainly do. But in a restorative garden, and this is important, in a restorative experience in nature, the restoration taking place is mental, it's cognitive, it's psychological, it's not physical. There are some very real physical symptoms that result from these cognitive issues. But the theory of restoration is addressing the restoration of your mind, your mental strength, not your body, with the understanding that the physical is going to improve with the mental. So a typical example would be somebody under great stress. The stress is a result of overworking without any relief, too many expectations, too little time, too much directed attention, that without relief is going to lead to mental fatigue and more stress. And we know through research that stress affects our body's organs in many different ways. And if this stress is there for too long without any opportunity for relief, then our body's organs react in physical ways, harmful ways. Stress can lead to mental fatigue as well, followed by a decline in the ability to think and learn and socialize. So if we aren't able to find relief from our stress, from our cognitive mental stress, then our physical health can be very seriously and very, very negatively affected. So the takeaway point here is that restorative environments are aimed at restoring your mental capacity and not specifically aimed at restoring your physical function. However, it's assumed that with the restoration of your mental strength, the related physical issues will also improve. I want you to remember that, because we're going to come back and kind of talk about the opposite in a little bit. So a healing garden, on the other hand, could be a restorative space like I've just talked about, or it could be a garden that's primarily concerned with promoting physical access and improvement. And we will talk about some specific examples of that shortly, but that's why healing gardens is the broader category, and then restorative gardens follow below that. So let's take a look at some examples. This is the Elizabeth and Nona Evans Restorative Garden, and it's in the Cleveland Botanical Garden. Despite the fact that this beautiful, calming, quiet garden is next to a very busy dining terrace and the main view of the garden's library, the enclosed plantings and the stone wall that's around it really help to provide this quiet space and this sense of enclosure that really provides that sense of being away from the surrounding areas. There is a beautiful pool where the water kind of falls gently in there. It muffles nearby traffic sounds. There's actually a very busy walkway just on the other side of the wall there. There's very fragrant, richly textured plants that kind of grow all over the place. They provide a really wonderful source for that fascination that we talked about. Walkways provide even, the walkways lead to areas that have even more kind of private sitting areas and little smaller spaces for people to be able to talk quietly. Lots of wonderful things here. So this really does fulfill all of those 4 components of a restorative space. Now, a very different type of restorative garden is this one here, which is the Alnarp Rehabilitation Garden, which is in southwestern Sweden. And the people that use this garden have actually been referred here by their doctors or their insurance companies or their employers because they can no longer work as a result of depression or burnout, which is actually a medically diagnosed situation over there, which is pretty amazing. It's basically an extreme mental fatigue leading to a stress-related illness. So this garden is just under 5 acres and it's divided into a number of garden rooms. Clients can, if they wish, do nothing but relax in this quiet, hedge-enclosed welcoming garden, or they can do light tasks in the greenhouse. They can work in the vegetable garden or in the orchard. They can take a long walk along a forest path or relax in a large meadow. And the garden has been specifically designed with this series of garden rooms, basically outdoor garden rooms. And the point is that no matter where you are in that journey back to health, there is an outdoor space that's going to accommodate your needs, either for nature or for the amount of other people in that space. And so it was very intentionally designed that way, both for your ability to work and your ability to be around other people. So because of that, there is space to accommodate most needs. And that really very easily then fulfills that compatibility aspect of a restorative garden in a very different way than the previous example that I showed you. Okay, so continuing down that restorative track, we're going to look at some more specific garden types here. And the next one we're going to talk about is a meditation garden. This type includes those 4 aspects of the restorative setting, but then would also include design elements that serve as a catalyst in an individual's personal quest for a place of deeper consciousness toward emotional or physical healing. So looking at the definition of meditation or meditate, to think or reflect, especially in a calm and deliberate manner, to train calm or empty the mind, often by achieving an altered state as by focusing on a single object. Meditation, I think, can be further defined as looking inward and working toward the goal of inner peace and healing. And this certainly could take the form of a series of garden rooms or enclosures within a space. It might also include some symbolic physical elements in the garden, such as sculpture or particular specimen plants. Here's a really beautiful example of a meditation garden, and it's the 12-step garden at Scripps McDonald's, which is the 12-step is in the Alcoholics Anonymous program. Unfortunately, this garden no longer exists, but it's just one of the most beautiful gardens I've ever seen. It was a really rich place for reflection and conference and healing. You can see here, each one of these little spaces was one of the 12 steps. And in the floor, there would be that one of those steps was inscribed in a stone. And so you could go to each one of these spaces and kind of work your way through the garden. Very rich materials in each one of these. There was always some kind of a focus point, beautiful plants, oftentimes a water feature, a piece of art, a place to sit. So really just a kind of sanctuary space for meditation and reflection, representing each step in that 12-step recovery process. There's a labyrinth here, commissioned artwork, just gorgeous. There's one of the mosaics that was designed for, and you can see, you can't see all the writing in it, but one of the stones in the ground with the step transcribed in there. So then under the meditation garden, a type of meditation garden would be an actual labyrinth garden. This can be considered a subtype. And as probably most of you know, if you've been to Kanapaha Botanical Garden, they have a beautiful labyrinth garden there. And it's just a wonderful place to walk and to meditate, to think, and you tend to be doing that in an inward sort of a way. You certainly can be looking out as you're doing that. It's kind of hard to walk in a labyrinth when you're looking out because it almost forces you to sort of look down and walk more slowly, because that's kind of part of the point. Here's another one actually in the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens. What I like about this is a beautiful one. It doesn't have quite that many plants in it, but the upper one, you see the little boy there, they have these finger labyrinths too. And so you can actually run your finger all the way through this as well. And I think that's a really neat version of a labyrinth garden. The next type of restorative garden I want to talk about is a contemplation garden. And these are very closely related to a meditation garden. Here, looking at our definition, contemplation, a concentration on spiritual things, is a form of private devotion, state of mystical awareness of God's being, an act of considering with attention, the act of regarding steadily. So we can certainly see from these definitions that there's a slightly more spiritual, perhaps even religious component to a contemplation garden. And while that doesn't necessarily mean a major change in the design of the garden, I think it does suggest the inclusion of specific symbolic or representative objects in the garden. And again, it depends on who the users are, to serve as catalysts for thought. A Stations of the Cross garden would be a good example of a contemplation garden. And just as meditation can really be thought of as looking inward and working toward the goal of inner peace and healing, I believe that a contemplation garden is often defined as looking beyond yourself and examining issues that are larger than you. So this distinction could really be seen through a physical design as suggesting the framing of long views in the garden to help facilitate this extrospection. One of the really most wonderful examples I've seen of a contemplation garden in terms of a healing garden is the Howard Ulfelder Healing Garden at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And you can see the little green space with the green and yellow trees there is it. It was designed by the Halverson Design Partnership and built in 2005. And it's a small garden, but it's expansive because of its view and because it's located on the 8th floor of the hospital. But it also has a very intimate feeling when you're actually up there because the garden itself is not very large. There's also an interior space where you could just see kind of on the left, the atrium there, so that when the weather, which it can be bad in Boston, you can still be in that space and enjoy the garden and its views. So the garden is really designed as a place of respite. It includes teak and beautiful teak furniture and granite furnishing, lots of plants and sculpture. There's a water feature. You can see that just black granite square. So it just kind of flows off the water. There's no depth of water to that, but it makes a nice sound. It creates a beautiful reflection. And then you get these beautiful, stunning views of the city skyline and the Charles River. You can see on the right side of the picture here, there's a glass parapet there. So here you're kind of in this angle, you're seeing the reflection back. I think I've got another. Here on the left picture, you can see that you don't even see the parapet and you just get this really amazing view. It's very quiet up here and it kind of serves as a soothing retreat from the very stressful things that are going on in the hospital. So the garden really serves as an important respite and truly provides those 4 components of a restorative environment. That glass parapet ensures that nothing blocks those sweeping views and that these views then really help to facilitate that contemplative experience of things kind of beyond and greater than oneself, which can help when you're in a hospital environment, whether you're the patient or you're the family member, trying to figure out why you're there, why you're going through these things. The setting really conveys the strength and the solidity of the city, but also the extent and the beauty of nature. And that juxtaposition can be very profound as well. Which we as visitors of this garden are really just a small but important part. So the contemplation of that we are part of something that's much larger than ourselves, that can actually be a very comforting thing to contemplate in stressful times. Another type of restorative garden is the sanctuary garden. And again, looking at definitions, sanctuary is a consecrated place or a place of refuge and protection. So going on to look at the term refuge, because oftentimes people associate sanctuary with having a religious connotation. I think for the purpose of this discussion, we're kind of staying focused on the well-being aspects of the word. So that does steer us toward refuge. When you look at refuge, it's shelter or protection from danger or distress, a place that provides shelter or protection, something to which one has recourse in difficulty. And I think that third part is especially fitting when you're thinking about the relationship with gardens, right? The something to which we have recourse in difficulty is our garden space. While the four components of a restorative experience continue to be important here, and again, that's being away, extent, fascination, and compatibility, this type of garden is calling for a more specific design element through the use of the concepts of shelter and protection. So in the same way that the design of the meditation garden would probably include some symbolic physical elements, the design of the sanctuary garden would probably include manipulation of spatial planes, overhead, vertical, to physically create that sense of shelter or protection, which then is going to help to create that opportunity for restoration in that context. And I want to repeat here, the fact that this garden type suggests some specific design elements, and they could be hardscape, they could be hopefully lots of planting to create those spatial planes. This in no means that there's only a few options for implementing these elements. There are many, many, many ways to create that sense of refuge and shelter in a garden. An example of a sanctuary garden is the Gift of Life Family House in Philadelphia. And this is a facility that serves kind of like a Ronald McDonald house. It's a home away from home for transplant patients and their families. So it provides a temporary, affordable housing and supportive services to those who are traveling to Philadelphia for transplant-related care. This is a garden that occupies a very small kind of slice of space between the building and then the very busy outside Philadelphia street. And there's a tall fence or wall that kind of helps to create, actually it's just a wooden fence to create separation from the street. And so lots of lush plantings there to kind of give you that sense of being away. There's the water feature there you can see. There's a small children's play area for the children that are there. Lots of ornamental trees and shrubs that bring a lot of wildlife in. And it's a really nice view. Let's see if here's another one. You can see some tables for people to come out there. Really a nice small little space that really does provide that sense of sanctuary. And then another example, or I should say a subtype of a sanctuary garden would be a hospice garden. And I've got an example here of a San Diego tribute garden, which is a hospice in San Diego. And these gardens are, this hospice is surrounded by gardens on all four sides. It's really beautiful. There's walking paths that weave around the building for family members to spend time outdoors. They offer a way for children of the families to really expend their energy outside. Each room has its own little outdoor space to look out if they're able to, if they're not able to actually get outside. And the building is situated at the top of a hill, so there's really very beautiful views of the adjacent valley from everywhere, sculpture all over this garden. And there's a lot of places to sit in that kind of quiet contemplation. It's also a very strong sense of sanctuary there for people that are coming to the end of their lives. And then the last type of restorative garden I want to talk about are sensory gardens. So this, of course, is a garden that's designed to stimulate your senses. And obviously, all well-designed gardens should stimulate your senses naturally. But I do believe that a true sensory garden should place special emphasis on plants, objects, and spatial arrangements that provide various sensory experiences throughout the year that are intentional, that are purposeful, that are repeatable. and not just occasional. Well-designed sensory stimulation gardens or sensory gardens can both be stimulating and also relaxing. And really, oops, let's see, there's another really great example. Here we go, is the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens Learner Garden for the Five Senses. This is in Boothbay, Maine. There are sections of this garden that are devoted to each of the five senses, and they include many, many ways to explore your five senses in each one of those gardens. The lower right here, this is one of those sound stones where you can put your head in there and hear how it sounds. There's all sorts of plantings and water features and raised beds and all sorts of really wonderful ways for no matter how old you are, how young you are, to really explore these. A lot of it is very accessible. It's really a great place to very intentionally emphasize and explore sensory stimulation. Okay, so that gave you a quick overview and a few examples of the restorative track under the healing gardens. We are going to bounce back up and we are now going to look at the active track. Kind of look at this healing garden again. So we talked about the fact that the restorative experience is aimed primarily at the restoration of one's mental capacity. And therefore, the restoration garden is really geared more toward a passive experience. There is another track of garden types that also falls under the healing gardens level and next to the passive track, which would be more fittingly described as the active track. And these are the garden types that are going to be aimed at improving the physical aspects of the person. So just as we talked about with restoration gardens, where physical improvement follows mental improvement, in this track, the mental improvement is going to follow the physical improvement. But the focus, the goal of the garden is going to be on the more active aspects of the garden. So I see the first garden type on this track being the enabling garden. So let's take a look at another definition. Enable, to provide with the means or opportunity, to make possible, practical, or easy, to cause, to operate. So the enabling garden is about making the experience of the garden accessible, pure and simple. Whatever the issue or disability, the enabling garden aims to eliminate or at least ease that issue. So examples you're all familiar with: raised beds for those using wheelchairs or who can't get low to the ground, or people using walkers. Things like square foot gardening, frames and bright colors for those who have low vision or are blind, ergonomic tools and different kinds of design elements, like on the left here, hanging baskets on pulley systems for those with arthritis or weak muscles. There are many, many examples that I know a lot of you are familiar with. So the focus of the enabling garden as a garden type is really more about universal design with gardening as its goal than about a restorative experience. But again, there's a double layer here. As those physical barriers are eliminated, then the doors open to all types of healing experiences, including those of a psychological nature. But the primary goal of an enabling garden is to address the physical needs of the users, thereby making physical interaction with the garden possible for all. So there are at least 3 subcategories of the enabling garden, the first being a demonstration garden. And the Buehler Enabling Garden at the Chicago Botanic Garden is a really excellent example of that. They do have some programming here at this garden and some great programming, but by its location at a major botanic garden, the largest impact it has is through educating visitors on enabling gardens and on horticultural therapy programs. They have many ideas here on that are displayed on how activities of a garden can be accessible, varying heights of raised beds and vertical wall gardens, which you can see here, water features that invite you to touch and all that kind of stuff. So lots of really great stuff. So although they do programming in this garden, there's many, many more people that are touched by this garden by learning about enabling gardens. The second type of enabling garden I want to talk to you about is what I call an eldercare garden. And this would be a subcategory of an enabling garden. And by this, I mean gardens at nursing homes, assisted care living facilities, adult daycare, and any other kind of facility that specializes in the care of older adults. In order to serve their full purpose, these types of gardens must be accessible, whether for gardening itself or just for moving through the garden. So having things like railing for supports and appropriate furniture, things like that are going to be crucial for comfortably sitting in the garden, paved paths, things like that. Physical accessibility is of course crucial for older adults, but psychological accessibility is also very important. Do they feel comfortable and secure coming out to the garden? So things like overhead structures that extend and soften that transition between indoors and out, that's really important. Making sure that the change in light and temperature isn't too abrupt. So again, they're comfortable making that transition. Opportunities to sit close to the building while still being able to be in the garden is really important for that transition. Are there views and things that they can progressively move farther and farther into the garden while still feeling safe that they can sit and be comfortable somewhere out there? And then of course, lots of shade, that's really important. So an example of an Eldercare Garden would be the Woodland Garden here, which is in Pennsylvania. This is at a continued care retirement community. It was created when a building addition enclosed a courtyard, and there's a lot of pathways here that lead to various areas within the courtyard garden. It includes a pond and a waterfall, a small sitting area, a large outdoor dining area. And it's a very tranquil sit area. It's seen a lot of different uses. This pond and waterfall area, and you can see one of the things I like about this is that even though this is not a bridge, you can kind of see where the little railing is and the pathway material changes. It's not a bridge, but it has the feeling of being a bridge. So it feels like a destination. You can look over and look at this little water feature. Apparently somebody snuck a frog into the pond at some point, and so now the residents love to come out and see if they can find the frog, and that gives them a destination and something to do. And they love to listen to the frog at night. So it's really been a very wonderful place to get them moving. So under an elder care garden is what I would call an active elder care garden. And this has all those same considerations, but it includes more opportunities for active participation in the garden. And this gentleman is a great example of this kind of a garden. He's a resident at the Stapley facility in Germantown home in Philadelphia. And he actually created the Peace Garden, which is a community garden there. All of the food grown in this garden is used by the culinary staff at that residence. Some of the produce, things like tomatoes and peppers, vegetables, are also then given to the staff members and the residents. And so he has kind of put this together, and the residents there are active and they're able enough that they can go and work in these community gardens. And so this is a really great experience for them. Obviously not all these facilities are able to have programs like that. This is another one that's called the Back Porch Garden at Medford Lees in New Jersey. And it's a gathering place for all the residents here at this CCRC. They have weekly, right now I'm sure they are not, but before COVID, they were having weekly concerts. Great place for people to meet and socialize. So there were non-gardening things going on here as well. Lots of great music. And when there aren't things like that going on, there's a lot of raised beds and different kinds of gardening type programs that they do out here. There's even groups that just come out together to read the newspaper in the garden, which is really nice. There's garden club groups that take care of all the plants out there, and then different kinds of holiday gatherings, some that focus around plants, some that don't. And then another subcategory of this would be the dementia or memory care garden. And of course, it would consider all taking into consideration all the things that we've talked about, but would also then include some very specific design elements to provide safety and a positive experience in the garden for those suffering from dementia. Things like a single entry and exit point, along with some very easily identifiable reference points, the routing of the path, so it serves as a guide. Actually, this is a very bad example of that. I should take this picture out. Generally with dementia, at a dementia residence, you do not want any right angles on the path because people with severe dementia will get stuck and not know which way to turn. It feels like a barrier to them. So I'm not going to spend any time talking about design elements for dementia gardens, but just to know that gardens can be very helpful for people experiencing dementia. It can really reduce aggressive behaviors and agitation and all sorts of things. So as much opportunity for them to get out into the garden freely and safely is a really, really wonderful thing. I do have an example of one here I want to show you. This is the Portland Memory Garden. This is the only public dementia garden in the United States. And it is in a Portland neighborhood. So people can just go there with their family members that have dementia. It's open to the public from dawn to dusk, and it is enclosed by a fence. So people can, it's got a gate, people can walk around freely. Plants are native, so they're very familiar to people. There are destinations in the garden, places to sit and rest, benches, there's always a place to walk. One of the things, actually, let me go back here. One of the things I think is neat about this garden, if you look at these raised beds, you can see they slope. So they start out low and then they get higher at the other end. And it's kind of a neat way to find what's comfortable for you in terms of where you're comfortable gardening. And there are programming opportunities at this garden as well. A couple others here. This is St. Mary Manor, another dementia garden with concrete looping pathways for people to be able to independently walk through here. Lots of heirloom plants that are familiar to people with dementia, you know, classic perennials, lots of wildlife in here. So that's a really soothing environment as well. See the echinacea here. And then this is the Sophia Louise Dirkbridge Wegge Living Garden, which is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Also some beautiful outdoor opportunities for people with dementia to get out there. There is a water feature. Water features can actually be quite dangerous for people with dementia because they often want to climb into them. So, but it can also be very soothing to have that sound. So that's something that you need to be very careful about and work with an expert on how to include a water feature in a dementia garden. But again, looping pathways, some heirloom plants, places to sit. And in this case, because it's a family center, there's lots of opportunities for kids as well. And then this last, the last garden I wanted to show you in terms of dementia care, which I think is so interesting. I came across this garden. It's in Australia and it's called Benora Point Dementia Garden. And this garden was Australia's first dementia garden. It actually opened about 10 years ago, and more of them have been developed since then. I have unfortunately not been able to find any additional information, despite the fact that every year or so I go back and I try to look for it. But in addition to just being accessible, these gardens aimed to provide cognitive and sensory stimulation through their inclusion of destination points. So they included things like clotheslines and folding ironing benches, chicken coops, you know, raised gardens, and all these different kinds of retro items so that the residents living there felt very familiar and they had familiar items to interact with. You know, you can see that there's like the mailbox there. I mean, nobody's actually delivering mail to that mailbox, but they can go out and they can interact with the mailbox. You hear about some gardens where there's a car parked that's never going to move, but the gentleman can go out and wash the car because that's something that they were familiar with for many of their years. So, you know, there's all these different kinds of things that were very familiar and help to keep them calm. The staff have found that the residents really enjoy tinkering with these items and just kind of interacting with them, and that it really helps keep them active and kind of keeps them relaxed and not agitated. A pilot project that they did revealed overwhelming improved health outcomes for the residents with a 21% reduction in the Cornell Depression Score and a 30% reduction in unresolved behavior such as verbal and physical aggression. And again, I have not been able to find any additional information about that. I really hope there's been some more done. The thing at the time that they were talking about doing, which I think is also very interesting, was to create a mock bus stop within the garden. Many people believe that the problem of wandering for those people with dementia is in large part a result of the fact that the person with dementia is trying to find their way home. They know they don't belong in this facility. They know that's not their home and they're trying to go home. So for somebody that was used to taking the bus, going to the bus stop seems like the first step in finding their way home. And so this concept of maybe they get to the bus stop, they feel in control, they're waiting for the bus to come. And before they get frustrated about the bus not coming, they sort of forget what they're doing and they wander off to do something else. That may sound kind of like you're tricking them, but in fact, perhaps you're giving them a way to feel in control and to sort of sidestep some of that potential frustration. I have not been able to find any evidence on whether that research was done or not, but I really think it's interesting. And that's certainly something you could create some really fun things like that in the garden. Okay, and then the last, I know I'm running out of time here, the last type of garden I want to just tell you about was a therapeutic. This is the third subcategory of an enabling garden, and it's a therapeutic garden. So the therapeutic garden is going to have as its focus some kind of therapeutic intervention. Looking at the definition, therapeutic of or relating to the treatment of disease or disorders by remedial agents or methods. This definition really steers us toward the medical model of care, and the therapeutic garden should support the prescribed treatment for the patient or client, and in doing so, help the facility with which is associated meet its goals. So because of that, a therapeutic garden should really be designed to produce a measurable outcome. Just as a medication taken for a particular illness is expected to produce a desired effect. A therapeutic garden is designed for use as a component of a treatment program, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, horticultural therapy, among others. It may exist on its own, or it could be an extension of an indoor therapeutic program area, or it could be part of a larger healing garden. So a physical therapy garden would certainly be a type of therapeutic garden and would be designed, of course, to support physical rehabilitation, providing an environment where goals could be set and measured consistently. Anything done inside can certainly be done outside given the weather. And a great example of this is the Kennedy Krieger Institute Therapy Garden. This is in Baltimore, Maryland. This is a program that serves children and adolescents. And this garden has been specifically designed to complement the work of the therapy staff. And it's made up of a series of outdoor rooms that provide a setting for physical and cognitive therapy. The designers incorporated a series, and you can see on the left here, you can actually see those rooms. These pictures were taken right when the garden was installed. So the plants are still very young and you don't see a lot of green, but it obviously has grown a lot since then. But the designers purposely involved a lot of variety of spatial scales, paving patterns, textures, elevation changes, and then linked them all with this, you can see this water rill right here. This is this water feature that runs the course of the garden. And that really appeals to the children. You can, oops, gosh, I don't know why that is blank. But you can see though, children love to interact with the water. They want to run along the water, you know, they drop balls in there and kind of chase after them. There's different kinds of staircases and ramps and ground textures that really help the children to manage those environments of everyday life as they are rehabilitating whatever kind of injury or disease they might have had. So it's really a beautiful place. And here you can see, so not only is it beautiful and engaging and natural, but it's also really getting a lot of that important physical therapy work done, and it encourages movement. And one of the things that the facility is so proud of is that it doesn't look like a giant obstacle course because they really worked hard to integrate the physical challenges subtly into this garden. Okay, and then the last garden type I want to mention under the therapeutic garden subcategory is another subcategory called the horticultural therapy garden. And a horticultural therapy garden is also designed to accommodate client treatment goals primarily through horticultural activities, and it would be managed by a trained horticultural therapist. Now, most horticultural therapy gardens are going to be completely barrier-free so that nothing gets in the way of the people-plant experience. However, others may combine horticultural therapy with a more type of a rehabilitation garden with various types of raised beds and walking surfaces and changes in elevation to mimic real world challenges. And it would depend on the type of horticultural therapy program it was. So that could vary quite a bit. And you can just see some examples of raised beds here. This is Rusk Institute in New York, their glass garden. This was the very first horticultural therapy garden to be built, and it was actually started in the late 1950s. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. There is now a big hospital building there, but it was built on the concept that rehabilitative medicine should harness the power of nature to heal the whole person, not just that illness or disability. And these gardens were designed specifically to emphasize accessibility, movement, and connection to nature. And there's some pictures of it. You can see the different kinds of raised beds. They had a greenhouse, and the patients really, they came there and they had specific goals that they worked on to improve their health while there. This is another hospital, the Schwab Rehabilitation Hospital. It's a therapeutic garden on their rooftop. And it's a 10,000 square foot rooftop space that has all different kinds of therapies that use this, this area, raised beds, different kinds of groups. There is a horticultural therapy group here, sensory stimulation sessions, all kinds of things. So just to reiterate, this horticultural therapy garden uses plants, plant-based activities as a therapeutic intervention to support the goals of the larger facility and the individuals served there. A couple more pictures of that one. So there you have it. That is a relationship framework for healing garden types. And again, I just want to say one more time that it's important to recognize that none of this is absolute. Not only is there going to be overlap in some of these garden types, but many of these gardens are going to have multiple purposes. But what I put this together to really help us to understand that this is a framework for understanding the relationships between gardens, the nuances between healing garden types. And categorizing these garden types, I think, is really important so that we can talk intelligently about the distinctions, and so that imprecise descriptions of these different kinds of gardens don't really muddy our attempts to educate stakeholders and potential clients or constituents that we're working with, to really help them to embrace the importance of the different settings. Defining healing gardens with precise language also really helps us to plan and design and implement these gardens and the programming that's going to take place there. And perhaps more important, as I said at the beginning, compare and evaluate these different gardens, learn from them so that we can do better each time, and prove what we all know and why you all are master gardeners and doing what you love, because there are so many different levels of healing experiences that we can have in gardens. This is not a finalized hierarchy by any chance. There are garden types, some of the ones I've listed here, that I didn't include today, either because of time or because I haven't been able to find actual examples of them yet. But I do plan to add to them. And actually one of them that I've recently been reading about is the social distancing garden. This is actually a garden in Austria, with some ideas about how to create safe social distance gardens. But I do want to keep working on this. So I would love to hear any feedback from any of you. But that basic structure of this framework, meaning the passive side, the restorative side, and the active side, or that enabling side, that's pretty straightforward. And then the very last thing I want to point out is that for those gardens in the active track, in order for those kinds of gardens to thrive, they have to have quality programming associated with them. Just because they include raised beds and areas for gathering, that doesn't mean that they're going to be used the way they're intended to be used. They could be designed amazingly, and if there's not somebody there making sure they're being implemented that way, they could fail. So it really is important. It's important for the institutions and the facilities and the people involved with them that there's somebody there whose job it is to make sure that programming is taking place. Programming is being planned and implemented to take advantage of that space and to help connect people with nature. And that's where therapeutic horticulture and horticultural therapy and other kinds of garden programming come into place, and what we do at Wilmot Botanical Gardens. And I know that many of you know all about what we're doing. I'm not going to spend any time on that. But to put it in a nutshell, we do therapeutic horticulture, and actually in some cases horticultural therapy, to increase the quality of life in people, special groups of people. And we do this by working on particular goals, whether they're physical function, cognitive, social interaction, or maybe coping strategy type goals, through meaningful activities that employ the use of plants and nature. So by we need to carefully plan and implement these activities based on the needs of the group, just as you would in these gardens, based on the needs of those people that you're working with. You need to think about what are the activities that I can put together to really combine people and gardens and plants and nature together. We can't just expect that these things are going to always happen spontaneously. Nature is there to help us along the way and to make it easier, for sure, but we need to be intentional. We need to be purposeful to really put those together. So that's something really important to think about. And that is all of it for me today. I think I have one more picture here inside our greenhouse. I would love to hear any questions or thoughts you guys have. And thank you for having me.
All right, thank you very much, Lee. Um, so we have a couple questions, and and I'll relay those to you. So they came into the Q&A, but I decided to keep them until the end. And if anybody else has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A for Lee to help answer. But one came in that was asking about so it's looking at that codependency of the question had to do with the codependency of humanity or humans and nature and that disconnect that has occurred between the two. So has there been any research with regards to healing gardens or therapeutic gardens that have to do with like child behavior and gardening and say like technology disconnection? Like one thing I think about is like that Last Child in the Woods type of discussion point, but I don't know, is there any research that you can think about or things that are being done with regarding that topic?
That's a great question. And yeah, if you aren't familiar with Last Child in the Woods, that's a great book to read. And there's also, oh gosh, and Taylor, maybe you remember the name of it's the Child something network that has come out of the book. What's the name of that? It's a
Oh,
website, Child
yeah,
something, it's another C word. I'll come CC network or something, but
I can pull it up.
yeah, okay. Which has some really fantastic resources that kind of came out of that whole push from The Last Child in the Woods, Richard Louv. And as far as I am aware of, there hasn't been a tremendous amount of research on typically developing children and interaction with nature. There has been a growing body of research on children's developmental disabilities or autism or some other things like that, and the use of horticulture and gardens. So I think we've got a big gap there. But I do think that that we can use nature and gardens as a way to counteract some of this scary screen time. And, one of the things that I am working on right now, because I think I am seeing right now in my work, the far end of that, which is college students are under severe stress and they're dealing with depression and panic and anxiety and all this kind of stuff. And it's not just from social media, but that has a lot to do with it. And so I think that we're just going to be seeing this issue grow. I think at the college student age, they're in a better position to start recognizing some of these problems and realizing they want to do something about it. And we're actually just got a little bit of funding. We're working on a program for our UF students here to come and start to learn to use nature as a tool to alleviate, as a coping strategy, to work on some of those issues. I think we need to start way earlier. And so I do think it's possible, but you've got to pull kids out of their environment to do that. And I think at school, and I know many of the Master Gardens are doing fantastic school programs, at school gardens, and I think that is the first step. And then finding ways to continue that at home and to continue that after school. And, I say that, and all these challenges are coming into my head as well that go along with that. But I do think that there are ways to make that happen. It's easier with some kids than with others for so many different reasons. But that is a gap in our research, I think, because I do believe that if we had some really strong research saying, look at this and look at the difference between these kids and those kids and what access to nature is doing, we might get a little bit more behind us. That's why we need Michelle Obama back to help us with some of those school gardens also.
There's, I put the link, it's the Child and Nature Network.
Thank you, that's it.
That's what it is. Yeah. So
and it's got great ideas and great resources. So if you're interested in that, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's a great response, Lee, because I know that's a common discussion that people are talking about is how to integrate early, like we're talking about early childhood development and that important engagement that they have with nature and gardening and school programs is a great way to do that, especially with as a stress response, a positive stress response.
And I just will add that whether you have children or grandchildren or you work with kids, one of the best ways to do it is, what the research does say is that non-structured time in nature is more important for young kids than structured time in nature. So if you have any way, whether it's convincing your kids who have kids, or whether you can, have some neighborhood kids, just to get them out there splashing in puddles and lifting up rocks to see all the, wigglies under those rocks, or walking in the woods and climbing on trees, that is what makes a difference. There's a lot of research that shows us that can lead kids on to a trajectory toward adult environmentalism and all sorts of things like that. It's that non-structured. And I think that the Richard Louv stuff will tell you, the network will talk a lot about that as well. The structured stuff is also important. That's what helps lead to some of those improved academic scores. But at the younger age, that non-structured time is more important.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And so I put that, like I mentioned, I put that link in the chat box. And that
great.
book is called Last Child in the Woods. If you haven't read it, I encourage everyone to do so. So a couple other questions that did come in had to do with, I'm going to follow up with everybody an email that has resources on regarding like the program this evening, and I'll include that link that I just sent. But Lee, do you have any available like contact information that we can share? If not, I can always include that in that follow-up. Because
there we go. There's my email.
Oh yeah, wonderful. Because
so email me. And as I said, you can always Google Wilmot Gardens at UF, and I'll pop up through there, or environmental horticulture, or anything like that. But yeah, there's my email.
Wonderful. And do you have to be a UF student in order to go through that certificate program?
You do not. Absolutely not. You can be what we call a non-degree seeking student. I will tell you, because I'm not to scare anybody off, but it is a university course. This is not a continuing ed course. So while I love having current students in there as well as current students, I just want people to understand that it is a regular university level course. So it's a course that has a lot of requirements, but absolutely. And if you want more information on that, email me, I'll send you the information. You don't, if you sign up, you don't even have to take the full certificate. If you just want to take that intro course, you can do that. You're not committing to the entire certificate. Of course, we'd love it if you took the whole thing, but I can send you some further information on that if you want to hear more about it.
Perfect. And I can include that link in that resource follow-up.
Okay, great. And just for timing's sake, we are offering it in the spring, but that course is full. We will be offering that intro course again in the fall semester, which starts in August, end of August, I believe.
And one of the questions came up is the cost of the certificate. I'm assuming you're just paying typical credit cost for the university.
Actually, it depends. If you're a non-UF student, it's if you're in the state of Florida, you do pay UF resident. So it's like $212 a credit hour, and they're 3 credit hour courses. If you are outside of Florida, you do pay a non-resident rate, but it's like half the rate of what you would. I think it's $450 a credit hour. So each course, it's somewhere between, $650 and $11 or $1350, something like that for a course.
Perfect. And the last question that I have on here, do any of these healing gardens have rocking chairs?
Ooh, I hope so. I think one of the pictures I showed you was a rocking chair, but yes, I love rocking chairs. They absolutely should. As I'd say, the one caveat would be sometimes rocking chairs can be a little dangerous to get out of. So depending on the users of the space, you'd want to be a little careful about that. But yes, those can be so soothing. So yeah, I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, especially that when you're in a rocking chair that goes too far back and you get that feeling of falling.
Exactly.
So, but I know we'll have some more time for questions, but I do want to put in the chat box. We do a follow-up survey as part of this program. Please take some time and fill out that survey. It allows us to evaluate the programs and see how well it's doing, and allows us to make sure that we improve our programs as we go. So please fill out that's a Qualtrics survey. It's in the chat box, and it'll be in that email as well.
That'd be great. And Taylor, if I could mention, one of the things we're trying to do is to compile a list here at UF of all of the garden program, people plant programs that might be going on in the state of Florida, but really anywhere in the United States. So if any of you out there are know about a program in your area where, you know, somebody might be doing some kind of a gardening program with older adults or with kids that we would love to hear about it. We're not going to bother them. You know, we might send them an email or give them a phone call and just find out what they're about. But we're trying to put something together because we don't have a very strong network. And I think if we all knew about each other, we could help each other a little bit more. So I would love for you all to send me an email right at this email here. If you're familiar with anything, maybe a contact name or a phone number or something like that. I'm having a graduate student kind of work on compiling a list so that, you know, we just have that. I think it would be a really great resource for all of us, master gardeners, the university. So I'd encourage you to do that if you can.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Lee. Yeah.